This presentation was developed by the Paul S. Sarbanes Transit and Parks Technical Assistance Center, or TRIPTAC. Federal land managers are charged with maintaining the delicate balance of providing access to resources and quality visitor experiences while at the same time protecting those resources. This challenge can be viewed as an opportunity to provide solutions through alternative transportation options, such as improved bicycle and pedestrian facilities. Unfortunately, the knowledge and effort required to develop such solutions is often unavailable at individual land units. This presentation is intended to help federal land managers gain a familiarity with planning guides in order to increase awareness of possible solutions or facilities and communicate more effectively with planners and engineers. In the next few minutes, you will be provided with a brief overview of 7 guidebooks that provide standards commonly used in relationship to the design of bicycle and pedestrian facilities. It is not intended to provide a thorough understanding of each guide, but to introduce each one, give an overview of relevant sections, and discuss some benefits and drawbacks of each guide. Following the presentation, you will have the opportunity to view a case study which presents some common challenges and review possible solutions that can be found in the guides. 3 of the books were developed by the American Association of State Highway and Transportation Officials, commonly referred to as AASHTO. The first is A Policy on Geometric Design of Highways and Streets. The second is The Guide for the Development of Bicycle Facilities. And the third is the Guide for the Planning, Design, and Operation of Pedestrian Facilities. A 4th guide that we will introduce is the Manual on Uniform Traffic Control Devices. The 5th and 6th guides were developed by the National Association of City and Transportation Officials, or NACTO. They are the Urban Bike Design Guide and the Urban Street Design Guide. The final guidebook we will discuss is the National Park Service's Guide to Sustainable Mountain Trails. For documents that are not available free of charge to the public, you may want to check with your local library. AASHTO's A Policy on Geometric Design of Highways and Streets, often referred to as the Green Book, was updated in 2011. This guide contains very little information specific to bicycles and pedestrians. It is primarily a roadway design guide. For bicycle and pedestrian-related topics, it often refers to AASHTO's other publications, which will be discussed next. AASHTO's Guide for the Planning, Design, and Operation of Pedestrian Facilities was published in 2004. Many references within the guide were published before 2000. Since then, there has been significant research activity and progress on pedestrian issues. Other references within this guide refer to manuals such as the Highway Capacity Manual, AASHTO's Bike Guide, and the Federal Transportation Bill that are also outdated. As a whole, the guide does provide an overall perspective of pedestrian issues, but does not include information regarding rural areas. If you are interested in this guide, you might want to consider checking with your local library. A second edition is expected in 2015. AASHTO's Guide for the Development of Bicycle Facilities was updated in 2012 from the previous version, published in 1999. It is available for purchase from the AASHTO website. Again, you might want to consider checking with your local library to review the contents. If your library does not have a copy, you may still be able to obtain it through an interlibrary loan. Within the bicycling community, many view this guide as not proactive enough in its recommendations. For example, treatments such as cycle tracks are not discussed. In addition, it does not address planning and design for bicycles and pedestrians on narrow or single-track natural surfaces. There are some online webinars available that discuss the contents and use of this manual. There are 5 chapters of this guide that would be of particular interest to a federal land manager in regards to bicycle facilities. These chapters include planning for bicycling, designing for bicycling on roads, designing for bicycling on shared use paths, bicycle parking, and maintenance operations. Chapter 2 is on planning. The guide recommends that planning for bicycling be integrated into a larger planning effort. From a federal land manager's perspective, this means integrating planning for bicycling and pedestrians into the Comprehensive Conservation Plan, Resource Management Plan, General Management Plan, or Recreation Resource Management Plan. In Chapter 2.42, there's also discussion about typical planning activities. You may also want to consider TripTac's online training and best practices manual on good practices to encourage bicycling and pedestrians on federal lands. Chapters 4 and 5 of the guide discuss design. Chapter 4 is specifically focused toward on-road facilities. Some topics that may be of interest are marked shared lanes, wayfinding, rumble strips, contraflow bike lanes, and contrasting green color pavements. Chapter 5 discusses shared use paths. Some topics that may be of interest are the minimum paved width and stopping sight distance. Chapter 6 of the Guide for the Development of Bicycle Facilities is on bike parking. It provides recommendations on bike rack locations and the styles of bike racks. A discussion of bike racks and a photo of one in operation can also be found in the Guide to Good Practices to Encouraging Bicycling and Pedestrians on Federal Lands mentioned earlier. Chapter 6 also defines short-term bicycle parking and discusses long-term bicycle parking. However, this may be less applicable to federal lands. Chapter 7 discusses maintenance and operations. One of the topics that a land manager may want to consider is the discussion of joint programs with neighboring jurisdictions. Other topics that are discussed within this chapter include sweeping, surface defects, pavement overlays, the reflectivity of both lines and signs, and chip seals, which are strongly discouraged. The Manual on Uniform Traffic Control Devices, or MUTCD, is available at no cost and can be found at the URL listed below. The idea behind the MUTCD is to create national standards which enable road users to see consistent signage when traveling across the United States. Until recently, this document primarily focused on motorized traffic. Pedestrian and bicyclist considerations are now becoming more prominent. Currently, bicycle-related information is found in Part 9, Traffic Control for Bicycle Facilities. There are 4 chapters within Part 9, General, Signs, Markings, and Signals. Of particular interest to a federal land manager might be the discussion related to wayfinding in the Signs chapter, including Figure 9B-4, Guide signs and plaques for bicycle facilities. Guidance specific to pedestrians can be found in Chapter 4F on pedestrian hybrid beacons. Section 3B.18 on crosswalk markings also contains information specifically pertaining to pedestrians, although this information is primarily presented in relation to the larger transportation network. These are not the only sections with information related to bicycles and pedestrians, but they are the primary sections that discuss the two modes. In order to understand the MUTCD, it is important to understand the difference between what is meant by standards, guidance, options, and support. A standard is a statement of required, mandatory, or specifically prohibited practice regarding a traffic control device. All standard statements are labeled within the MUTCD, and the text appears in bold type. The verb shall is typically used when discussing standards. A guidance is a statement of recommended but not mandatory practice in typical situations, with deviations allowed if engineering judgment or engineering study indicates the deviation to be appropriate. All guidance statements are labeled and the text appears in bold type. The verb should is typically used when referring to guidance. An option is a statement of practice that is a permissive condition and carries no requirement. Option statements sometimes contain recommendations for allowable modifications to standard or guidance statements. All option statements are labeled and the text appears in a non-bold type. The verb may is typically used in reference to options. A support statement is an informational statement that does not convey any degree of mandate, authorization, prohibition, or enforceable condition. Support statements are labeled and the text appears in non-bold type. The verbs shall, should, and may are not used for support statements. Consider the implications of these different terms when reviewing the information pertaining to pedestrians and bicyclists within the MUTCD. The National Association of City Transportation Officials, or NACTO, just released the Urban Street Design Guide in 2013. This guide is focused primarily on urban areas and thus may not be applicable to some federal land managers. A webinar that discusses this guide was presented by the Association of Pedestrian and Bicycle Professionals, or APBP. An archived version can be found on their website at apbp.org. Since the guidance in the 2004 AASHTO Pedestrian Guide discussed earlier is outdated in many circumstances, this guide is a good alternative, particularly for information related to pedestrians in the section called Crosswalks and Crossings. For example, it shows visually how changes to an intersection, such as curb extensions and tight corner radii, can result in shorter crossing distances. It also contains information related to pedestrians and bicycles scattered throughout the guide. For example, in the section called Intersections of Major and Minor Streets, the reconstruction drawing shows how the implementation of a raised crossing and curb extensions, among other treatments, changes the intersection. Also, within the chapter on intersections, a raised intersection is presented and information is provided on how the intersection affects the relationship between motorists and pedestrians at the crosswalks. NACTO's Urban Bikeway Design Guide was developed in response to engineers seeking guidance as more cities embrace European practices, including cycle tracks. You can find an online free version of the guide on NACTO's website. The guide also refers readers to other publications, such as the MUTCD and AASHTO's Guide for the Development of Bicycle Facilities. The NACTO Urban Bikeway Guide was developed to address the needs of cities where competing demands for right-of-way presents unique challenges. This is not unlike the challenges to federal land managers, where providing access while minimizing resource impacts is a priority. The following are several topics within the Urban Bikeway Design Guide that might be of particular interest to federal land managers. The design guide compares bike lanes to cycle tracks and also introduces buffered bike lanes, all of which may be good options to be considered by federal land managers. The guide also identifies active warning beacons for bike routes at unsignalized intersections or mid-block crosswalks which may be manually or passively activated. The beacons provide cyclists and typically pedestrians the right-of-way for crossing the road. The MUTCD also provides additional guidance regarding the use of rectangular rapid flashing beacons, RRFBs, which are a special type of warning beacon. Another special type of hybrid beacon is called the High Intensity Activated Crosswalk, or HAWK. Hybrid beacons may be applied where minor street volumes do not warrant a signal. The MUTCD contains warrants for hybrid beacons regarding bikeway signing and colored marking for bike facilities, such as bike boxes, which are used to increase the visibility of bicycle facilities to identify areas of potential conflict between bicyclists and other road users, and to convey priority for bicycles in conflict areas. Colored bicycle facilities may also help to prevent illegal parking on bike lanes, which may be of interest to federal land managers. Finally, shared lane markings, also termed SLMs or SHAROs, are not a facility type and therefore are discussed within the bikeway marking and signing selection. Instead, SHAROs are markings used to indicate a shared lane environment for bicycles and automobiles. The Guide to Sustainable Mountain Trails was developed by the National Park Service in cooperation with the Colorado Outdoor Training Initiative in 2007. It is a free resource document that can be found on the National Park Service website. As mentioned earlier, AASHTO's Guide for the Development of Bicycle Facilities specifically identified that it was not intended to be used for the design of soft surface tracks. If your bicycle pedestrian challenges involve soft surfaces, you might consult this guide. Since it was a partnership between NPS and the Colorado Outdoor Training Initiative, some aspects, such as the focus on Colorado ecosystems, are very Colorado specific. However, the lead author, Hugh Duffy, has indicated that it can and has been used in many areas outside of Colorado. A valuable part of this guide is the Trail Project Cycle tool, which is shown here. Now that you have been introduced to the primary manuals and guides used by engineering and planning professionals, you will have the opportunity to review an actual case study at a federal land unit to see how they are used for reference to determine solutions for bicycle and pedestrian challenges.